The air is thick and warm, the kind of warm that has weight to it, the kind that settles against your skin like a second layer and makes the whole world feel close and near. You are not where you were a moment ago. The ceiling above you is gone. The walls have dissolved. What remains is sky, a sky so full of stars that it seems impossible. A sky that has no streetlights pushing against it, no city glow softening its edges, just pure black distance, scattered with more light than you have ever seen in one place at one time. Below that sky, the world breathes. You can hear it. A low, slow respiration of rustling leaves and shifting branches and the endless murmuring of insects whose names have not yet been invented, whose songs have not yet been heard by any human ear. The ground beneath you is soft, with 1,000 years of fallen fern fronds and decomposed bark, a mattress built by time itself, pressing gently back against your weight. This is the Cretaceous. Not a word on a museum placard, not an illustration in a textbook. This is the living, breathing, dreaming Cretaceous. 67 million years before your birth, on a night when the largest predator Earth has ever known is not hunting, the T-Rex is somewhere close. You can feel its presence the way you feel the presence of anything vast and ancient and real. But tonight, it is not moving. Tonight, it is still. Tonight, the world it lives in is doing what all worlds do when the giants rest. It is becoming quiet. It is becoming beautiful. It is becoming itself. Settle in. Let your breath slow. Let the Cretaceous night find you where you lie. There is nothing here to fear. There is only the warm dark and the stars and the long, slow exhale of a world at rest. Hello and welcome. If you are here, then you are looking for rest, and rest is exactly what this night was made to offer you. Tonight we are not going to race through facts or chase drama from one corner of prehistory to another. Tonight we are going to do something slower, something rarer, something that most accounts of the dinosaur age never quite allow themselves to do. Tonight we are going to simply be present in a single Cretaceous evening, moving through it at the pace of the creatures who lived there, breathing its air, listening to its sounds, letting its ancient stillness find a home inside you. The story we are entering is called The Night the T-Rex Didn't Hunt. It is set approximately 67 million years ago, in what will one day become the western interior of North America, a vast, low-lying coastal plain where a shallow inland sea has recently retreated, leaving behind rich floodplains of extraordinary fertility. The forests here are dense and layered, alive with flowering plants that have only recently begun to spread across the earth, mixing with ancient conifers and enormous ferns in a riot of green that has never been catalogued, never been named, never been walked through by anything that could pause to wonder at it. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric dinosaur stories like this, consider subscribing. New stories like this one arrive every single week. Ready and waiting the next time, sleep finds you slowly. But for now, the night. The particular night we are entering is an ordinary one, in all the ways that matter most. No catastrophe is coming. No meteor glitters in the sky tonight with any special menace. The world is whole and lush and breathing with the weight of 160 million years of unbroken dinosaur history behind it. And somewhere in a valley pressed between two low ridges of ancient sandstone, in the bend of a wide and shallow river that runs dark and slow beneath the stars, a Tyrannosaurus Rex is lying down. It did not hunt today, and there are reasons for that. Quiet reasons, biological reasons, reasons that science is only now beginning to understand, and that we will explore together as this night unfolds. But before we follow the T-Rex into its stillness, it is worth spending a moment to understand the world it rests inside. Because the Cretaceous is not a backdrop. It is not a stage set. It is a living system of extraordinary complexity, and every creature in it, from the smallest moth-like insect circling above the riverbank to the largest titanosaur wading through the shallows upstream, is part of something that hums and breathes and turns together like a mechanism of almost impossible precision. You are somewhere in that system now. The air around you carries the scent of wet earth and crushed vegetation, and something floral that you cannot quite identify, something sweet and faintly resinous, drifting from the flowering trees that line the river's edge. The temperature is warm, not uncomfortably so, but the kind of warmth that makes the body relax its vigilance, that loosens the muscles across the shoulders and the back of the neck, and lets the jaw unclench and the breath deepen without effort. The sound is what you will remember longest. Not the silence. There is no true silence in the Cretaceous. There is instead a layered texture of sound, a music of the ancient world, and as you lie here, letting your eyes grow heavy, it is that music that will carry you through the night. Insects in frequencies that have no human translation. Water moving across smooth stones with a patience that has been practicing for millions of years. The occasional deep, soft percussion of something enormous shifting its weight somewhere in the middle distance, not threatening, not urgent, just enormous and alive and going about its business in the dark. The T-Rex breathes. Somewhere past the bend in the river, beyond a stand of towering conifers whose lowest branches begin 40 feet above the ground, you can feel more than hear the slow rhythm of something very large at rest. It is a presence rather than a sound, a warmth in the air, a slight heaviness in the ground beneath you, as though the earth itself has adjusted slightly to accommodate the weight of that sleeping body. We will visit it soon. But first, let the world settle around you. Let the Cretaceous night do what it has been doing for 67 million years before this moment. Let it breathe you in. The river has no name. It will not have a name for 67 million years. When it finally receives one, when the first humans arrive in this part of the world and begin the long, quiet process of labeling the landscape around them, it will be a different river in a different configuration, carved by different geology, running through a different arrangement of hills and valleys that has been shuffled and reshuffled by plate tectonics and volcanic activity, and the slow, patient work of ice. But tonight it is this river, the unnamed one, and it is running dark and low and gentle through the flat heart of the Cretaceous floodplain, and its sound is one of the most constant things in this world. You are resting on the high bank above it. Not the tallest bank, nothing dramatic, nothing that would make you feel exposed or anxious, just a gentle rise of packed earth and river clay above the water level, a place where the soil has been built up over centuries of seasonal flooding and retreat. The bank beneath you is firm and dry. The grass here and there is grass here. A fact that surprises many people, because they imagine the dinosaur world as entirely fern and forest, when in fact grasses had already evolved and were spreading in small, tentative colonies across the wetter lowlands. The grass here is short and dense, and slightly warm from the day's long soaking of heat. The river below you carries a slow current of stars. The sky above is so clear, so free of any atmospheric interference, that its reflection in the dark water below is almost a perfect copy, two skies, one above and one below, and the river threading between them, like something that belongs to both. Small insects skim the surface, each one surrounded by its own tiny ripple, its own tiny disturbance of the reflected starlight. They have been doing this, these small skimming things, for longer than the dinosaurs have existed. Some of the insect lineages alive in this moment are older than the Triassic. There is a humility in that, a useful kind of smallness that settles into the chest when you sit with it. What did the river carry in the Cretaceous that it no longer carries now? Scientists have studied ancient river sediments from this period with extraordinary care, and the answer is richer than you might expect. The waters of Cretaceous river systems in western North America carried a fine suspension of volcanic minerals from the distant mountain ranges to the west, giving the water a slight mineral quality that enriched the floodplains wherever it spread. It also carried pollen, extraordinary quantities of pollen, from the flowering plants that were at this moment in the middle of their great revolution, spreading across landscapes that had previously been dominated by conifers and cycads and ferns. That pollen settled in the river mud and hardened and survived, and millions of years from now, paleontologists will read it like a letter, understanding from its composition exactly which plants grew here, in what proportions, in what season. The pollen record tells us something remarkable about this particular time and place. The flowering plants, the angiosperms, to use the word science will eventually give them, were not yet dominant here. Not quite yet. The great conifer forests still held the high ground, still sent their shadows down across the riverbanks and their roots deep into the water table. But the flowers were coming. You can see them, if you look carefully, in the edges of the forest where the light reaches during the day. small bursts of color tucked between the ancient green, pale yellows and soft whites, and the occasional startling burst of something deeper, something that would not look out of place in a garden many millions of years from now. The scent of those flowers is stronger at night. This is one of those quiet facts about the Cretaceous that never quite makes it into the standard accounts. But it is real and important and worth sitting with for a moment. Many of the earliest flowering plants relied on night-active insects, and perhaps some of the small nocturnal mammals of the period for pollination. And so they evolved to release their most intense fragrances after dark, when their pollinators were most active. The nighttime Cretaceous riverbank was, among other things, a place of extraordinary scent complex, layered, rich with the chemical language of plants speaking to creatures that could hear them. You breathe it in. The warm air moves across your face with just enough motion to feel intentional. A slow, generous breath from the river, carrying its freight of mineral water and ancient pollen, and the faint sweetness of Cretaceous flowers that will never be named, will never be pressed between the pages of any book, will leave only their pollen ghosts in the mud for future scientists to read. It is enough. It is more than enough. The smell alone could carry you towards sleep, that warm biological certainty that this is a safe place and a good place and a place worth resting in. Somewhere upstream, a splash. Not the splash of a predator. There is a quality to that kind of sound that every living thing recognizes without being taught. A sudden violent displacement of water that carries its own warning. This is a different kind of splash, slower and more deliberate, the kind made by something large wading through the shallows for reasons that have nothing to do with pursuit. You cannot see what it is from here. The bend in the river hides it, but the sound continues for several seconds, rhythmic and unhurried, and then it stops, and the river returns to its murmur, and whatever made that sound has settled into the water or moved away from it into the dark of the forest, a fact worth carrying with you into sleep. The rivers of the Cretaceous western interior were home to an extraordinary diversity of fish, including some species that grew to enormous sizes. Gifactinus, a predatory fish that could reach 15 feet in length, cruised the waters of this region, though it preferred the inland sea to the west rather than the river systems themselves. What lived in these rivers were smaller but no less strange. Primitive bowfin relatives, early gars, small sharks that had pushed into fresh water from the coastal regions, and a variety of ancient ray-finned fish whose descendants still swim in rivers around the world today, though changed beyond recognition by 67 million years of evolution. The river is not empty. It is never empty. It is full of life moving in the dark, silent in the way that water-living things are silent, present, and purposeful below the surface. While above it the night goes about its quiet business. The stars wheel slowly overhead. Not quickly enough to see with the naked eye, never that, but you know they are moving, turning in their long, slow arc around the fixed point of the North Celestial Pole, which in the Cretaceous is not where it will be in your own time, because the Earth's axis wobbles over long periods in a cycle called axial precession, and 67 million years is long enough for that wobble to shift the pole star considerably. The night sky of the Cretaceous is the same stars, the same constellations of light, but arranged slightly differently, pointing in slightly different directions. It is a familiar sky, made strange by time, much like the world beneath it. Let the river talk. It has been talking since before you arrived, and it will go on talking long after you drift away from here, long after this particular night has folded itself into the deep past and become geology and sediment and the compressed record of what once was. Let the water find its way across the stones. Let the insects trace their small bright circles above the surface. Let the enormous night settle around you like a blanket, like a world, like the oldest kind of comfort. There is the comfort of being held inside. Something much larger than yourself, that is not paying you any particular attention, that is simply breathing and turning and continuing, as it always has, as it always will. You are very safe here, on this high bank in the warm dark. The T-Rex is resting. The world is at peace. And the river, which remembers nothing and carries everything, is moving steadily toward the sea. You find the T-Rex the way you find most large things in the dark, not by looking directly at it, but by noticing how the landscape changes around it. The trees at the bend in the river thin suddenly, their lower branches stripped away by a body that needed to pass through them repeatedly over the weeks and months that this individual has claimed this territory. The ground where you step becomes softer, more churned, worked into a loose, dark mud by the repeated pressure of something enormously heavy moving across it. And then the smell, not an unpleasant smell, not the smell of carrion or rot that most people might expect, but something musky and warm and faintly mineral, the smell of a very large, warm-blooded animal in a state of deep physical rest. She is lying along the base of a sandstone outcrop that rises maybe 30 feet from the valley floor. A long, flat shelf of pale stone that curves around her on two sides like the back of a cupped hand. She has used this place before. The sandstone is worn smooth at the point where her flank presses against it. A slow sculpture made over many nights of contact between stone and scale. She is lying on her side, her enormous head resting on the ground, her forelimbs, those compact, powerful, much misunderstood arms, folded against her chest in a posture that would look, if you could see it clearly in the dark, almost relaxed, almost familiar, almost like something you have seen before in a much smaller version. A very large animal finding the position that distributes its weight most comfortably and staying there. Here is a fact that most people do not know, and it is one worth sitting with. Tyrannosaurus Rex did not hunt every day. This is perhaps obvious when you think about it. No large predator hunts every day, because the energetic cost of a major hunt is enormous, and the success rate is far lower than most people imagine. Modern lions succeed in roughly 1 out of 5 hunts. Wolves manage slightly better. But what science has only recently begun to understand, through careful analysis of T-Rex bone chemistry, growth patterns, and metabolic modeling, is that Tyrannosaurus may have gone 5, 7, even 10 or more days between successful kills. A single successful takedown of a large hadrosaur or triceratops could provide enough calories to sustain this animal for over a week, and during that week, the T-Rex would do what this animal is doing now: very little. She breathes. You can hear it. The exhalation is slow and long and carries a slight warmth that reaches you even from several meters away. Not a blast of hot air, nothing dramatic, just a gentle displacement of the night as her enormous lungs empty and refill in their own unhurried rhythm. The lungs of a Tyrannosaurus Rex were not like a mammal's lungs. They were constructed on the same avian principle as the lungs of modern birds, a flow-through system rather than the in and out system that humans and most other mammals use, with a network of air sacs extending through the body that allowed a one-way current of air to move continuously through the breathing apparatus, extracting oxygen with remarkable efficiency. Even at rest, even in the deepest phase of her current inactivity, her body is handling gas exchange in a way that is more sophisticated than the systems inside any mammal alive in this moment. What is she thinking? This is always the question that rises first, and it is worth holding honestly rather than dismissing it too quickly. The brain of Tyrannosaurus Rex was large by dinosaur standards, particularly the olfactory bulbs, the regions devoted to processing smell, and the regions associated with memory and spatial navigation. She was not stupid. She was not the slow, swamp-bound lizard that early paleontology imagined. But neither was she lying here in contemplative reflection, planning her next hunt in any conscious, tactical sense. What she was likely experiencing in her rest state is something that science would describe as a state of low arousal, a period of reduced metabolic demand, possibly something analogous to the drowsiness that mammals experience in the hours after a large meal. She had fed 3 days ago. The meal was still, in biochemical terms, still being processed, still being converted into the energy reserves that would eventually drive her next day of activity. Her tail lies behind her, that long, heavy, surprisingly elegant tail that she uses constantly when moving to counterbalance the forward lean of her enormous head and torso. At rest, it has straightened slightly from its usual rigid horizontal carriage, its tip resting lightly against the sandstone, the very end of it making occasional small, slow movements, not the agitated flicking of a hunting animal, but something slower and more reflexive, the kind of movement a sleeping body makes without the direction of any conscious intent. It sweeps gently across the pale stone and back, sweeps and back, a pendulum made of muscle and bone, and the genetic memory of 100 million years of reptilian ancestry. How large is she? The question deserves an honest answer, because the scale of a Tyrannosaurus Rex is genuinely difficult for the human mind to hold. She is approximately 40 feet long, which is less helpful as a number than as an image. Stand on one end of a school bus and look toward the other end. That is the length of her body. Her hips, the highest point of her profile as she lies on her side, are roughly 12 feet above the ground. Her skull alone is approximately 5 feet long, almost as tall as a person, and it is a skull of extraordinary mechanical engineering, latticed with lightweight struts and openings that reduce weight without compromising strength, capable of generating a bite force that has been measured through careful biomechanical modeling at somewhere between 7,000 and 12,000 pounds per square inch, the most powerful bite ever recorded in any land animal, living or extinct. And tonight, that skull is resting on the ground beside the river, its owner fast asleep, its impossible power temporarily offline, as quiet as any sleeping thing. The moon, when it rises, will catch the pale surface of her scales in a way that reveals their texture, not the smooth reptilian sheen of a snake or lizard, but something rougher and more nuanced, a mosaic of small, closely packed scales of varying sizes, larger over the flanks and smaller and more delicate around the joints and the face, probably pigmented in patterns that are still a matter of scientific debate, but were certainly not the uniform grey or green of most movie depictions. Recent fossil evidence from impressions of tyrannosaur skin preserved in exceptional conditions suggests patterns of varied scale sizes and possible evidence of countershading darker coloration above and lighter below the same basic camouflage principle used by countless predators today, from sharks to large cats. She may have had subtle stripes. She may have had dappled markings. The specifics are lost, but the principle of countershading is strong enough that most paleontologists now accept it as likely. But in this moment, the moon has not yet risen, and she is simply a shape in the darkness, an enormous warmth against the sandstone, breathing in the long, slow rhythm of a body that is making full and deliberate use of its rest. And you can sit here near her, not close enough to be reckless, not so close that the dream needs to become anything other than peaceful, but close enough to feel the warmth of her and hear the breathing of her, and feel nothing except the extraordinary privilege of being near something this ancient and this real. What does a T-Rex dream about? What does any predator dream about? The neuroscience of sleep is well established enough that we know dreaming is not unique to mammals. Birds dream, fish show evidence of sleep states, and it would be extraordinary if the large-brained theropods of the late Cretaceous did not experience some version of the consolidation of memory and experience that dreaming represents. Perhaps she replays the hunt from 3 days ago in some simplified, dreamlike form, the burst of speed, the moment of contact, the cessation of resistance that marks a successful kill. Perhaps she experiences something more abstract, more sensory, the smell of the river at dawn, the feel of warm stone under her feet, the particular acoustic texture of this valley that has become familiar to her over the years she has ranged within it. We will never know with certainty, but the question itself is beautiful, and it is exactly the kind of question that the night invites. Lying here in the warm dark, listening to the breathing of a sleeping giant 67 million years away from your own life. The river murmurs. The insects sing. She breathes. And somewhere above the sandstone outcrop, a warm wind moves through the upper branches of a stand of ancient conifers, pulling a long sigh of sound from the needles, a sound that is not quite wind and not quite music and not quite anything that has a name in any human language, but that carries in it, somehow, the precise feeling of a large and complex world going quietly and completely about its business in the dark. Let that sound find you where you are. Let it move through you the way wind moves through trees without resistance, without holding on, just passing through and continuing on its way. If you are still with us, still drifting through this ancient night, then sleep is finding you at its own pace, and that is exactly as it should be. If you have found some comfort here, consider subscribing. New prehistoric sleep stories arrive each week, and the next one will be waiting for you whenever you need it. For now, let the Cretaceous continue to breathe around you, and come with us deeper into the night. Step away from the riverbank now, or rather, let your attention drift away from it, carried by the sound of something moving quietly in the forest just behind you. Not the T-Rex. She is still at her stone, still breathing in that long, slow rhythm you have already learned. This is something smaller, something that moves with the careful deliberateness of an animal that knows it is not the largest thing in its world and has accordingly developed habits of extraordinary discretion. The ferns at the forest edge part and resettle without a sound, and whatever passed through them is already gone by the time your eyes could have found it. The Cretaceous forest at night is a different place than the Cretaceous forest by day. This is true of all forests in all times, but it is especially vivid here, where the diurnal and nocturnal worlds are divided not just by light and dark, but by the entirely different communities of creatures that claim each shift. By day, this particular stretch of valley is dominated by the activities of the large herbivores, the hadrosaurs that move through the forest edges in loose herds, stripping leaves with their extraordinary dental batteries, communicating with the low resonant calls that their hollow crests amplify. The small ceratopsians that browse the low vegetation, the occasional ankylosaur moving with its characteristic armored deliberateness through clearings where the undergrowth has been thinned by the passage of larger animals. By day, the forest is a place of visible, audible, biological activity. But when the light goes, all of that shifts. The large herbivores find their resting places hollows, open clearings where the sight lines are long, areas near water where the approach of a predator would be announced well in advance by the disturbance of the surrounding animals. They do not sleep as deeply as the predators. Their rest is lighter, more easily interrupted, more attuned to the surrounding sounds, for the same reason that prey animals in every era sleep more lightly than the things that hunt them. Evolution has tuned their biology to the understanding that sleep is a risk, and the risk is managed by keeping one part of the nervous system always partly alert, always processing the ambient sound for the particular change in frequency or rhythm that would mean danger. And when the day creatures rest, the night creatures emerge. This is perhaps the most underappreciated aspect of the Cretaceous ecosystem, the nocturnal community. The creatures that the daylight naturalist would never see, and that the fossil record, biased as it is toward the largest and hardest-boned animals, has largely failed to preserve in any satisfying detail. But they were there. The evidence, pieced together from rare fossil finds, from comparative biology, from the study of the insects and small animals that left traces in amber and lake sediment, all of it points to a rich and complex nocturnal world operating in parallel with the one we more easily imagine. There were mammals here. This is something worth pausing on, because for many people the narrative of the dinosaur age is a narrative that doesn't include mammals at all, as though the two groups existed in separate eras rather than sharing the planet for over 150 million years. In fact, the late Cretaceous of North America was home to a surprisingly diverse community of small mammals, most of them nocturnal, most of them insectivorous, most of them living the furtive, quick metabolizing lives of creatures that have learned to use the gaps and margins of a world dominated by much larger animals. There was a small marsupial here, related distantly to the ancestors of modern opossums, that weighed perhaps 2 ounces and lived in the crowns of the conifer trees, rarely descending to the ground, eating insects and small invertebrates, and perhaps the occasional piece of fruit from one of the early flowering plants. It is up there now, somewhere in the dark canopy above you, going about its small nighttime business with the focused intensity of something that has very little time and very much to do. Below the canopy, other small mammals moved through the undergrowth. The multituberculates, a now extinct group of mammals that were in some respects the rodents of the Mesozoic, filling many of the ecological niches that mice and squirrels and voles would later occupy, were particularly diverse and numerous in this period. They had teeth unlike any mammal living today, complex arrangements of cusps and basins designed for processing a wide variety of foods, including seeds, plant material, and insects. Some were burrowers, some were climbers. All of them were alert, quick-moving, and possessed of the outsized nervous systems that small nocturnal animals require. They were everywhere in the Cretaceous night, and their success over those 150 million years of dinosaur dominance was the quiet dress rehearsal for the dramatic radiation of mammals that would follow the extinction event, still 67 million years in the future, and what hunted these small mammals. Here is one of those facts that most accounts skip over. Some dinosaurs were nocturnal. Not the T-Rex, she was almost certainly a crepuscular to diurnal hunter, active in the low light of dawn and dusk, but resting during the deepest dark, her visual system built for conditions of reasonable illumination. But smaller theropods, particularly the troodontids, were very likely active at night. The troodontids had proportionally enormous eyes, among the largest, relative to body size, of any dinosaur group, and the orientation of those eyes was more forward-facing than in most other dinosaurs, providing better binocular vision and therefore better depth perception in conditions of low light. They were the owls of the dinosaur world, in a loose sense, though they were feathered and warm-blooded and probably much faster than any owl you have ever seen. One of them is nearby right now, a troodon, or rather, a troodontid, of the type that would eventually be described by scientists under various names, is making its way along the fallen log that lies parallel to the river's high bank, its head moving in the quick, precise tilts that birds make when they are using their eyes to locate something small and moving. It weighs perhaps 30 pounds. It is covered in close-packed feathers that in the right light would show a warm brown, darker on the back and lighter on the belly, with possible iridescent highlights around the head and neck that serve some display function whose specifics are lost. Its sickle claw on each hind foot is held elevated off the log, kept sharp against the bark, ready. It is hunting the small mammals. Tonight it will probably catch 2 or 3, eating them quickly and completely, bones and all. Here is something few people know about Troodon that will stay with you. Its brain-to-body ratio was among the highest of any dinosaur, and some neuroscientists who have modeled its neural architecture from endocranial casts suggest that Troodon may have had cognitive capacities somewhat analogous to those of modern birds, like crows and parrots, capable of simple problem-solving, with strong spatial memory, possibly with some form of social learning. What would a creature like that have felt, moving through the Cretaceous night? Not what humans feel, not the self-conscious awareness that we bring to our own nocturnal wanderings, but something, some version of attention, of intention, of the animal engagement with the moment that most complex vertebrates share across the vast distance of evolutionary time. It is there, on the log, and it is present to the world in some version of the way that you, lying here, are present to this story. The night in the forest is not quiet. It is simply quiet in a different register than the day. The insects are loudest here, a continuous, layered, throbbing texture of sound that shifts in frequency as you move from clearing to forest edge to deep shade. The beetles are clicking in the bark of the fallen log. Something that is not quite a frog but serves a similar ecological function is calling from the muddy margin where the river meets the bank, a slow, repetitive call that rises and falls without urgency. High above, the wind that moved through the conifers a few minutes ago has settled to a whisper, a long, drawn-out exhalation of the night air through 1,000 needle leaves, each one contributing its fraction of sound to the whole. You walk or let yourself drift deeper into the forest, and the sound of the river fades behind you. The tree canopy here is dense enough that the stars above are filtered to occasional glimpses through gaps in the branches. The air is cooler here, held in the shade all day and releasing its stored coolness slowly through the night. It smells of bark and earth, and the faint sweet rot of fallen wood returning to soil. And underneath all of that, barely detectable, the mineral richness of the ancient volcanic soil that has been building here over millions of years of geological time. The T-Rex is still breathing by her stone. You cannot hear it anymore from here. But you know it is happening. That long, slow rhythm that holds the valley in its gravitational center, that makes everything else in this ecosystem calibrate itself around it. The queen of the valley is resting, and because she is resting, everything else can rest a little too, can move a little more freely, can fill the spaces that her presence usually pressurizes and compresses, and fills with a particular quality of wariness that never quite leaves the air when she is active and visible. Find your own resting place here, against the base of a conifer, where the roots have pressed up into irregular hillocks of ground that offer a comfortable, slightly elevated surface. The bark is warm against your back. The forest breathes. Above you, somewhere in the dark branches, the small marsupial is still going about its quiet business, and its presence, improbable and delicate, and full of future possibility, is exactly the kind of thing that the night in the deep past offers to anyone who is patient enough to lie still and receive it. Beyond the conifer stand, the forest opens onto a wide, flat meadow. Not a meadow in any modern sense, not the carefully managed or naturally maintained grassland that the word might call to mind, but a natural clearing where a stand of very old trees fell some years ago in a windstorm, and the gap they left has been filled by a dense, low community of ferns and early flowering ground cover plants, their leaves dark and full in the starlight, pressing close to the earth, releasing a faint green scent that mingles with the smell of the damp soil below them. The hadrosaurs are here, Edmontosaurus. The particular hadrosaur species that ranges across this part of the late Cretaceous floodplain moves in a loose group of perhaps 20 individuals, and at this hour they are doing what herd animals have done in every era of Earth's history. They are resting together. Their bodies arranged in a rough cluster, with the largest individuals at the periphery and the younger ones nested closer to the center, each one oriented slightly differently, so that together they cover a wide range of directions, their collective senses forming a net that no single individual could provide alone. An Edmontosaurus at rest is a surprisingly beautiful thing, and it is worth spending a moment with this impression, because it runs counter to the image that most people carry of these animals. They are large, full adults, run to 30 or 35 feet, and weigh 4 to 5 tons, but their proportions are elegant in a way that the artistic reconstructions rarely capture fully. The tail is long and held horizontal, tapering smoothly to a fine point. The neck is carried in a gentle S-curve that brings the distinctive duck-billed head to roughly the height of a tall human's head when the animal is browsing. The skin, where it is preserved in the exceptional mummified fossils that have been found in North America, shows a texture of small, closely packed scales, with larger tubercles scattered among them, creating a surface that is more reminiscent of a pebbly river bottom than of the smooth reptilian hide of popular imagination. What color were they? This is always the question, and here it is worth pausing to share something remarkable that most people have never heard. In 2013, scientists began applying a technique called spectral analysis to rare preserved skin samples from hadrosaur fossils, and what they found suggests that at least some individuals had melanin-based coloration in their skin, not just in feathers, which are absent in this group, but in the skin itself. The implications are significant. Melanin pigmentation in skin is typically associated with some degree of color patterning, and the distribution patterns in the samples that have been studied suggest that Edmontosaurus and its relatives may have had countershading darker above, lighter below with possible irregular patches or stripes of varying tone, not the plain grey or brown of most illustrations. Something more alive, something that would have looked, in the dappled light of a Cretaceous afternoon, like an animal that understood the landscape it lived in and had worn it as a kind of clothing. In the dark of the meadow, the specific colours don't matter. What you see is the mass of them, the collective warmth and bulk and slow respiration of 20 large animals arranged in a tight community of mutual protection and shared comfort. The sound they make is remarkable in its subtlety. The breathing of 20 animals of this size should be loud, and in one sense there is a perceptible shift in the ambient sound of the meadow that is entirely attributable to their presence, a low, living undertone to the insect chorus and the distant river. But each individual breath is soft, deeper, and slower than you would expect from an animal of this size, regulated to a rhythm that science has only recently begun to understand. Here is something that most accounts of hadrosaur biology fail to mention. Edmontosaurus, like all hadrosaurs, had a respiratory system that shared features with the avian respiratory system, the same air sac arrangement that made the T-Rex's breathing so efficient, also gave the large herbivores of this ecosystem extraordinary respiratory capacity relative to their body size. This means that at rest, their breathing rate dropped to very low levels, perhaps as few as 3 or 4 breaths per minute for the largest individuals, and each breath was long and deep, extracting a high proportion of the available oxygen before the air was expelled. 3 or 4 breaths per minute. Slow enough to count, if you were standing here watching. Slow enough to synchronize with, if your own body wanted to find that rhythm. Let it. There is no requirement to hurry anything. The meadow is patient. The hadrosaurs are patient. The Cretaceous night has been patient for 67 million years, and it has a great deal of patience remaining. The young ones are in the center of the group. There are 4 of them, not newborns, but juveniles, perhaps 2 to 3 years old, still notably smaller than the adults that surround them but already carrying the characteristic Edmontosaurus proportions, already moving with the deliberate, considered weight of an animal that knows its own body and has learned to trust it. They are lying close to each other, and in some cases, actually touching a flank pressed against another flank, a head resting near another animal's neck, in a way that looks unmistakably social, unmistakably comforting. Not accidental contact, deliberate proximity. The question of social bonding in hadrosaurs is one that paleontology has been circling carefully for several decades, and the evidence is growing steadily more compelling. Trackway fossils showing hadrosaur herds moving together with juveniles, consistently positioned near the center, and adults consistently at the periphery. Nesting evidence that shows repeated use of the same sites across multiple seasons, suggesting communal nesting behavior. Bone chemistry analysis, indicating that some individuals stayed with the same group for their entire lives. These are not the behaviors of purely instinct-driven automatons. These are the behaviors of animals with social memories, with individual relationships, with something that serves the same function in their lives that community serves in ours. One of the adults raises its head. Not quickly, not in alarm. There is a quality to the alarmed head raise of a prey animal that is unmistakable, a sudden electrification of the entire body that would be impossible to miss even in the dark. This is slower, more gradual, the simple restlessness of an animal that has been lying still long enough to want to shift position. The head comes up, surveys the meadow in a slow arc, registers nothing that demands a response, and drops again. The movement disturbs the animal beside it, which also raises its head, also surveys, also settles. A ripple passes through the group. Not panic, not alarm, just the mild contagion of wakefulness that moves through any sleeping community when one member stirs. And then it subsides, one by one. Each animal finding its way back to stillness, back to the slow breathing, back to the warm shared dark. What do they know about the T-Rex tonight? This is a question worth considering. The hadrosaurs of this valley have been living alongside this particular T-Rex for as long as most of them have been alive. They know her in the way that prey animals always know their predators, not as an abstraction, not as a general category of danger, but as a specific individual with specific patterns and a specific range and a specific quality of presence that the nervous system learns to recognize over time. They know when she is recently fed. They know the patterns of her movement across the valley floor. And tonight, on some level that functions below conscious awareness but shapes behavior nonetheless, they know she is resting. The group is calmer tonight than it will be on nights when she is active. Not dramatically so. The vigilance that keeps the peripheral adults scanning the meadow edges does not switch off entirely, cannot switch off entirely, because that would be a vulnerability that evolution would rapidly eliminate. But there is a degree of ease in the group tonight, a quality of true rest rather than the alertness beneath rest that characterizes their nights when the T-Rex is moving. They feel the absence of hunting in the valley the way you might feel a background sound stop not registering the silence consciously, but relaxing into it without knowing exactly why. You relax into it too. The meadow is warm and broad, and the fern smell is pleasantly green, and the hadrosaurs breathe their slow 3 breaths per minute rhythm around you, and the insects are singing, and the stars above the gap in the tree canopy are doing their ancient, imperceptible wheeling. And there is nothing here that requires anything of you except your presence, your quiet, and your willingness to let the night carry you wherever it is going. Tilt your head back and look up, past the canopy edge of the conifers, past the dark fringe of fern tips at the meadow's margin, into the full open sky, where the stars are most numerous and the black between them is deepest and most complete. Something moves up there. Not a star, the movement is too close, too quick, too purposeful. It banks across the face of the Milky Way and disappears against a patch of darkness, and then reappears again, its silhouette briefly legible against the faint brightness of the band of stars, a shape that is all long beak and narrow wing and improbable grace. The pterosaurs are on the night shift. This is something science has been working out with increasing confidence over the past decade or so, using evidence from the optical design of fossilized pterosaur eyes, from the structural analysis of their inner ears, and from the particular patterns of wear on their teeth that suggest some species were feeding on creatures most active at night. The pterosaurs were not dinosaurs. They were a separate lineage of flying reptiles that evolved flight independently of the dinosaur lineage that eventually produced birds. But they shared the Cretaceous sky for tens of millions of years, and in the late Cretaceous, they were still present and diverse. Though their diversity had declined, somewhat from its Jurassic peak, as birds began to claim more and more of the aerial niches. The one above you is probably Nyctosaurus, a species whose name means night lizard, and whose characteristic feature is an extraordinary head crest, a single long bony spike rising from the skull with a branch at its top, forming a shape roughly like an inverted letter L, so large relative to the animal's body that it seems almost impossible, almost a satirical exaggeration of the crest-bearing tendencies that many pterosaur species shared. The function of these crests is debated, but most researchers now believe they served primarily as display structures, visual signals to other members of the species, communicating health, maturity, sexual fitness. In flight, the crest would have been striking, but it would also have been aerodynamically problematic unless the soft tissue that likely connected the bony spine to the back of the skull acted as a sail, which some researchers believe allowed Nyctosaurus to use its crest to help generate lift in soaring flight. It circles above you without appearing to notice you, banking in long, slow, tilting arcs that carry it across the meadow and back over the river and out toward the open water of the floodplain further east. Its wingspan is perhaps 4 or 5 feet, not the largest pterosaur by a considerable margin, but large enough to move through the air with authority, large enough to pull a fish from the surface of a shallow pool without losing its forward momentum. Whether it is actively hunting right now or simply moving between roost sites is impossible to tell from this distance. It simply moves, tracing its patient circles against the stars, and then it is gone, banked away into the darkness on the far side of the meadow. What is the sky of the Cretaceous like for the things that live in it? Science has modeled the atmospheric composition of the late Cretaceous with impressive precision, and what it shows is an atmosphere somewhat richer in oxygen than today's, perhaps 2 to 3 percentage points higher, which sounds small but which, at the scale of animal physiology, is biologically significant. More oxygen means more available energy per breath, which supports larger body sizes and more metabolically demanding behaviors. It also means that fires burned more readily when lightning struck dry vegetation, and the smoke from these fires was a regular feature of the Cretaceous sky, visible as distant plumes above the horizon on most days. But tonight the sky is clear. Whatever fires are burning in the distant uplands to the west are burning below the horizon tonight, invisible. The stars are the stars. This deserves more than a passing mention, because it is one of the strangest and most grounding things about being in this moment. The specific stars in the sky above you are, with minor exceptions, the same stars that are in the sky above the version of this world that you will return to when this night ends. The constellations are shifted slightly, as already mentioned, by the long wobble of the Earth's axis. But the stars themselves, the specific nuclear fires burning in their specific positions in the galaxy, are almost all present and accounted for. Sirius is there, though it is fractionally dimmer than it will be in your own time because it is a fraction of a light year farther away, the Earth having moved to a slightly different position in its orbit around the galaxy over 67 million years. The Pleiades are there, though the cluster looks marginally different, the individual stars having drifted over the centuries. Orion is there, though his stars too have drifted, and the pattern you would recognize is slightly distorted. You are looking at almost the same sky that you know, and yet no human eye has ever seen this particular arrangement. No human mind has ever processed this particular quality of starlight falling on this particular landscape at this particular moment in time. You are the first. You are the only. There is something enormous about that if you let yourself feel it, not frightening, not isolating, but enormous in the way that things that are genuinely vast are enormous when you stop defending yourself against the scale of them and simply let them be as large as they actually are. Another pterosaur crosses overhead, then another. They are not uncommon here. The proximity of the river makes this part of the valley attractive for the fish eaters, and there are fish eaters and insect eaters and the smaller pterosaurs that hunt the small mammals and lizards of the forest floor, each species tuned to its own ecological frequency, each one a different solution to the problem of being a vertebrate in the air. The pterosaur lineage solved this problem approximately 230 million years ago, and they solved it with extraordinary elegance. The wing of a pterosaur was not the feathered wing of a bird or the modified hand of a bat, but something unique in the history of life, a membrane of skin and muscle supported by an enormously elongated single finger, the fourth finger of the hand, which in the largest pterosaurs would grow to lengths of several meters. No pterosaur alive tonight is particularly large. The age of the giant pterosaurs, the Quetzalcoatlus and its relatives, the Azhdarchids with wingspans of 30 or even 40 feet that would stalk across the landscape like leather-winged giraffes, is still current in this part of the world. But those animals range in drier, more open environments further south and west, and the dense, well-watered valley you are resting in tonight attracts the smaller, more maneuverable species, the ones that can navigate through the twilight forest edges and skim the surface of the river without losing themselves in the canopy. They are perfect for this environment. They have been perfecting themselves for it for millions of years. When the pterosaurs land, and you can watch one come in now, banking steeply toward the tall sandstone cliff on the far side of the meadow, its wings tilting and adjusting in tiny, quick corrections as it approaches the rock face. They do so in a way that has puzzled pterosaur researchers for a long time. The landing mechanics of a pterosaur are unlike those of any bird, because the wings are structured so differently that the transition from flight to surface contact has to be managed differently. Current models suggest that they landed with their hind feet first, touching down with a bounce, using their wings as braking surfaces, then folding the wings rapidly and settling into a quadrupedal stance on all four limbs that is the natural resting position for a pterosaur on a solid surface. Hanging from cliff faces is also common, their large hooked claws giving them a grip on the rock that allows them to roost in the same way that bats will later roost, head downward, wings folded, conserving warmth against the night air. This one lands on a ledge about 40 feet up on the cliff face. You can just make out its outline in the dark, the distinctive crest catching a faint edge of starlight. It settles, adjusts, and goes still. Another joins it a minute later, slightly smaller, landing with the same quick, bouncing grace and folding itself against the cliff. They are roosting. They are doing, in their pterosaur way, what every creature in this valley is doing tonight in some version or another, resting, recovering, receiving the gift of the quiet hours. The sky above the meadow is still now, or as still as it ever is. The insects have not stopped. The night is not silent, but the aerial activity has reduced to the occasional silhouette crossing the stars, unhurried and purposeful, each creature going about its ancient business with the focused elegance of something that has had millions of years to get very good at what it does. Let your eyes follow one last shape across the sky, and then let your gaze rest. Let it settle. Let it release its focus and simply receive the dark above you as a darkness that is full rather than empty, that holds things you cannot see and that is holding you just as gently and completely. You do not hear the Ankylosaurus coming. This is itself a fact worth noting, because Ankylosaurus was roughly the size of a large modern tank, 18 feet long, weighing 6 to 8 tons, carrying on its back a continuous covering of bony plates and knobs called osteoderms that would, in any reasonable calculation, make it one of the louder animals to move through a forest. And yet it moves almost silently. The feet are broad and padded, the weight distributed so widely across each footfall that the ground compresses rather than crunches under it. The heavy belly that brushes the tops of the ferns as it walks hushes them rather than crashing through them. The Ankylosaurus has evolved, among its many remarkable adaptations, a kind of acoustic invisibility that complements its physical armor. It comes out of the forest at the far end of the meadow, moving at the unhurried, measured pace that characterizes everything about this animal. The Ankylosaurus does not hurry. It never hurries. It does not need to. The armored body that it carries is the product of approximately 80 million years of ankylosaur evolution, refined and perfected across generation after generation, until what exists tonight is one of the most comprehensive defensive systems that the natural world has ever produced. The osteoderms on its back and sides are not just bone plates sitting on top of the skin. They are fused into the skin itself, embedded in a matrix of mineralized connective tissue that makes the hide rigid and enormously resistant to penetration. The neck is armored. The eyelids are armored bony lids that can close over the eyes in a crisis. Even the top of the skull is reinforced beyond the structural requirements of an ordinary skull, because ordinary skulls are not built to withstand the bite force of a T-Rex. And at the tail end of all this armor, swinging at the end of a thick, muscled, carefully evolved tail, is the club. The Ankylosaurus tail club is composed of fused vertebrae and enlarged osteoderms that together create a mass of bone dense enough to be genuinely dangerous by some estimates. A direct strike from an Ankylosaurus tail club could generate forces equivalent to a large modern vehicle traveling at speed, enough to shatter bone, enough to permanently disable a Tyrannosaurus Rex if it connected correctly. This is not theoretical. Fossil evidence, including some T-Rex leg bones with healed injuries consistent with tail club strikes, and some Ankylosaurus tail clubs showing wear patterns consistent with active use, suggests that the club was indeed used, and used effectively, and that the evolutionary arms race between this armored herbivore and its predators was as real and as consequential as the evidence makes it appear. But tonight the tail hangs low. It sways slightly as the animal walks, a slow pendulum tracking the rhythm of its footsteps. But there is no tension in it, no readiness. This is not a defensive posture. This is simply the tail of a very large animal in a state of relaxed movement, making its way across a moonlit meadow, for reasons that probably have more to do with finding a particular patch of low vegetation it visited last night than with any complex decision-making. Here is something remarkable about the Ankylosaurus nose. It was, by the standards of dinosaurs, enormous. The nasal passages of Ankylosaurus are extensively modified, twisted, and convoluted in ways that create a greatly expanded surface area inside the skull, lined with tissue richly supplied with blood vessels, almost certainly housing an olfactory system of considerable power. Some researchers have suggested that the elaborate nasal structure of ankylosaurids served additional functions beyond smell, including possibly warming and humidifying inhaled air, useful for an animal that might have lived in seasonally cool environments, and possibly even playing a role in sound production. But whatever the additional functions, the smell was primary, and Ankylosaurus moved through its world on a river of scent information that is difficult for humans, with our impoverished olfactory systems, to fully imagine. What does it smell in the meadow right now? The ferns, certainly. The river, whose water smell reaches easily this far from the bank. The hadrosaurs, their warm herbivore bodies carrying a distinctive mixture of plant fermentation and musk. The small mammals that have been moving through the undergrowth. And the T-Rex, her scent is a permanent feature of this territory, layered into the vegetation and the soil and the air by months of her presence, a background note that the Ankylosaurus registers and categorizes with the deep animal certainty that distinguishes a T-Rex that is at rest from one that is active and hunting. Tonight, the scent says rest. The Ankylosaurus knows this. It finds its spot. Not the same spot every night. Ankylosaurus, unlike some territorial animals, does not seem to use fixed resting sites with the rigidity that would make it predictable and therefore vulnerable. But the chosen location tonight has the features that the animal's evolved preferences favor. Low vegetation to browse before settling, firm ground that will not allow its substantial weight to sink and create difficulty rising, clear sight lines in at least two directions, and proximity to the meadow's water source. It circles the spot once, a behavior that looks surprisingly similar to the circling that dogs do before lying down, and that serves a similar practical function of compressing vegetation and confirming the space's suitability, and then it settles. The settling of an Ankylosaurus is a slow, deliberate process. The front legs fold first, the enormous body tipping slightly forward before the back legs follow, and the whole weight drops with a rumble that is felt more than heard. A deep vibration transmitted through the ground, moving through the earth and through the roots of the surrounding ferns and into the soles of your feet and up through your legs and into your chest, where it settles as a low, quiet reminder that this world has weight and depth and reality. The osteoderms catch the starlight faintly, each one a small, smooth surface among the larger landscape of the body, creating a pattern that looks almost like a rocky hillside, which is not an accident. The visual resemblance of a resting Ankylosaurus to a patch of rough, rocky ground is significant enough that researchers believe it may have served as camouflage, allowing the animal to rest in open areas with reduced detection risk. A predator scanning for food would see something that registered, at first glance, as geological rather than biological. Only movement would reveal the creature, and resting ankylosaurs did not move unnecessarily. It is still now. Its breathing has dropped almost immediately to the slow, regular rhythm of rest, the same avian-style efficiency of the gas exchange system that all dinosaurs shared means that even at rest, the oxygen supply is adequate, the body maintained at the correct temperature, the metabolic processes continuing their quiet work without any particular effort from the muscular or nervous systems. The brain of an ankylosaurus was, in proportion to its body size, quite small comparable to that of a large modern crocodile, which is to say, functional, adapted, capable of the full range of behaviors that this animal's ecological role requires, but not a brain given to complexity for its own sake. It thinks what it needs to think. It rests when it needs to rest. It does not appear to carry the weight of anything beyond the immediate present. There is something almost enviable about that. Lying here, watching it in the dark, the enormous armored body, fully at peace, fully at rest, its extraordinary defenses temporarily suspended, not because they are not needed, but because the night is calm and the predator is sleeping, and the valley has settled into a quality of ease that even the ankylosaurus's nervous system recognizes and responds to with something that in a mammal you would call relief. Its tail lies out behind it, the club resting on the crushed ferns, heavy and quiet. Its breath rises and falls. The stars wheel above it in their imperceptible arc, and the Cretaceous night continues its ancient, generous work of holding everything inside it, gently and without discrimination, the armored and the unarmored alike, the predator and the prey, the sleeping giant by her stone, and the tiny marsupial in the canopy and you, here, now, breathing the old warm air, and letting your body, like the ankylosaurus, release the vigilance it has been carrying, and trust the night to hold it. Before there were dinosaurs, there were insects. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because the insect world of the Cretaceous is one of the oldest things in this ancient landscape, older than the dinosaurs themselves, older than most of the plant lineages you can see around you, a lineage of living things so deep and so persistent that its presence in this moment feels less like the presence of animals and more like the presence of something closer to weather, pervasive, immersive, structuring every aspect of the environment around it without any single element of it demanding your particular attention. The sound is what the insects offer tonight, above all else. It is not the sound of individual insects, distinguishable one from another, creating a melody you could follow. It is the sound of a community of creatures so numerous that their individual contributions blur into texture, into something that functions like the white noise of the Cretaceous, present in every moment of every night, varying in intensity and frequency with the temperature and the season, and the particular mix of species active in any given location, but never stopping, never falling entirely silent, always there as a background against which every other sound in the night plays out. Some of these insects you would recognize. The beetle lineages of the Cretaceous are ancient and already diverse, and while the specific species present tonight have been extinct for 67 million years, the beetles that descend from them are still with us in extraordinary numbers. Approximately 400,000 species of beetle are alive in your own time, making them by some measures the most species-rich order of animals on Earth. And the dominance they show tonight, the way their clicking and scraping and wing-beating presence underlies every other insect sound, is consistent with a lineage that has been refining its success formula for hundreds of millions of years. The true bugs, the hemiptera, the sucking insects that feed on plant sap and on each other and on the blood of other animals, are here in their Cretaceous forms, and some of them are stinging. This is not information that needs to cause you anxiety in this dream, but it is information worth having because it grounds the world in its full reality, in the understanding that even this ancient paradise was not without its small discomforts. It's reminders that the natural world is not curated for human comfort, but is simply going about its own elaborate business, and we are welcome to observe it, but it does not adapt itself to our preferences. The insects sting and bite. The T-Rex is formidable. The world was not safe. And yet it was also beautiful and warm and full of sounds that carry in them a quality of ancient permanence that is, in the end, more comforting than any version of safety could be. Here is something almost nobody knows about the insect world of the Cretaceous. We know what some of them looked like in extraordinary and precise detail because of amber. The amber deposits of Myanmar, formed from the resin of Cretaceous forests approximately 90 to 100 million years ago, contain preserved insects of extraordinary quality. Not just the outlines of bodies, but the structures of compound eyes, the arrangements of individual hairs on legs and antennae, the microscopic details of wing venation, all of it held in the golden suspension of ancient tree resin in a state of preservation that exceeds anything that can be achieved by normal fossilization. These amber insects are jewels of the natural world, and what they reveal is a world of insects not dramatically different from today's in its fundamental architecture, but different in its specific lineup lineages that no longer exist, combinations of features that have since been divided by 67 million years of evolutionary divergence. And in the amber, sometimes, the insects themselves tell a story. There are pieces of Cretaceous amber that contain insects in the act of mating, or feeding, or fighting, frozen mid-behavior by the sudden engulfment of resin in a way that preserves not just the animal but the moment. There is a piece of amber that contains a small parasitic wasp in the act of stinging a spider, both animals suspended in the golden medium at the precise instant of contact, a predatory drama captured across 90 million years. There are pieces that contain insects feeding on flowers, each one a frozen record of the ecological relationship between insect and plant that was, in the Cretaceous, still in the process of being invented, still in the early chapters of what would become one of the most important co-evolutionary relationships in the history of life on Earth. The Cretaceous flowers and the Cretaceous insects were making each other. This is the remarkable thing. The angiosperms, the flowering plants, were diversifying and spreading, in part because they had developed a partnership with insects that pollinated them far more efficiently than the wind, allowing them to invest less in pollen production and more in seed production, and the insects were diversifying in part because the flowering plants offered new food sources and new habitats. Each group was driving the evolution of the other, creating a feedback loop of diversification that would eventually produce the overwhelming majority of the plant and insect species alive on Earth today. And it was happening here, tonight, around you, in the quiet exchange between the small night-flying insects and the flowers that had opened for them, in the slow accumulation of evolutionary change, too subtle to see but too consequential to overstate. You notice a particular sound. It is slightly different from the general insect chorus, lower, more rhythmic, with a pulse to it that your nervous system finds unexpectedly soothing. It is coming from the ground a few feet away, from somewhere in the base of the fern clumps where the soil is moist, and the roots have pressed the ground into a series of small mounds and channels. A cricket-like insect, not a true cricket, which has not yet evolved in this form, but a member of an ancient lineage that serves the same acoustic niche and produces a similar sound through the same basic mechanism of stridulation. Wing edges rubbed together to produce a rhythmic pulse is calling from the darkness. It has been calling since before dark fell, and it will continue to call until dawn, and it will never know that anything was listening. The river murmurs, lower now, its sound modulated by some shift in the breeze that has reduced it to a presence at the very edge of hearing rather than a constant companion. The wind in the conifers has also settled. The night has reached its deepest point. The hours when everything alive has found its level of activity and settled into it, when the dramatic transitions of dusk are done and the coming transitions of dawn are still far away. This is the middle of the Cretaceous night, and it is as calm and as complete as anything you have ever experienced. What lives in the soil beneath you? This question could occupy a full night on its own, and it is worth at least touching on because the soil of the Cretaceous floodplain was in many ways the foundation of everything visible above it, the invisible architecture of bacterial and fungal and invertebrate life that processed fallen organic matter and released nutrients that fed the plants, that fed the herbivores, that fed the predators. Earthworm-like annelids were already present, though not the specific earthworm species we know today. Mites and springtails worked the decomposing leaf litter. Beetle larvae moved through the soil horizon in their slow, blind, intensely nutritious way. Mycorrhizal fungi threaded the soil with their networks, connecting tree roots to each other in the underground exchange networks that modern forest research has revealed to be one of the most sophisticated biological systems in existence. The forest above you is connected below. The trees are not competing with each other in the simple way that most people imagine they are exchanging. The old conifers send carbon to the young seedlings. The established trees receive water and minerals from the network in return for photosynthesis. The dying trees contribute their entire accumulated stores to the community as their root systems break down and release their contents into the shared medium. It is not individual. It is not separate. It is a system as integrated and as mutually dependent as any other. And it has been running for hundreds of millions of years with no need for anyone to understand or manage it. Let the ground beneath you be part of that system too. Let your weight settle into the soft Cretaceous earth, into the leaf-litter mattress, into the warm biological complexity of the ancient soil. You are not separate from it. You never were. The same elements that make up your body were cycling through other bodies and other forms for billions of years before your birth, and they will go on cycling for billions of years after. And right now, in this moment, they are resting in this configuration that is you, resting on this ancient ground, breathing this ancient air, listening to the oldest songs in the world. We are at the quiet center of the night now, and if sleep has not yet found you, it is close. If these prehistoric journeys bring you some measure of rest, consider subscribing to join us each week as we step into another corner of deep time together. The ancient world has many nights left to explore, and every one of them is waiting. But for now, we continue in the warm dark of the Cretaceous, still hours from dawn. She is still at her stone. You make your way back to her along a route that takes you through the forest edge and along the high bank of the river, the ground firm and dry under you, the river murmuring below, the whole valley in its nighttime stillness around you. The temperature has dropped perhaps 5 degrees from its peak in the late afternoon, but it is still warm enough that the warm-blooded body requires no particular effort to maintain its core temperature, still the kind of warm that sits lightly on the skin rather than pressing against it or pulling from it. The Cretaceous was, on average, warmer than your own world. The poles were largely ice-free. The oceans were higher by perhaps 100 to 200 meters, and the whole planet ran a global average temperature, perhaps 8 to 12 degrees Celsius, above what it will be in your own time. Tonight's warmth is the Cretaceous being itself. She has not moved significantly since you left. The great body lies exactly as you found it, the tail making its occasional slow pendulum sweep, the ribcage rising and falling in the long, slow rhythm of deep rest. But something has changed. The moon has risen. It came up behind the sandstone cliff while you were in the meadow, a gibbous moon, not quite full, casting the valley in a silver-grey light that makes everything slightly unfamiliar, slightly more dimensional than the pure starlit dark. The sandstone of the outcrop glows white where the moonlight falls on it. The river below catches the light in long silver strips, and the T-Rex, the enormous sleeping T-Rex, is now visible in a way she was not before, her body resolving from a bulk in the darkness to an actual form, the curve of the spine, the compressed elegance of the forelimbs, the massive jaw resting against the pale stone. How old is she? This is a question that paleontology has been able to answer with increasing precision through a technique called skeletochronology, which reads the growth rings in fossil bones the way a forester reads the rings in a tree trunk. Tyrannosaurus Rex grew at an extraordinary rate through adolescence, gaining perhaps 2,000 pounds per year between the ages of 14 and 18, and then slowed dramatically as it approached its adult size. The bones preserve this history in annual layers, each layer representing a year of growth, and from these layers, scientists have been able to determine that most T-Rexes in the fossil record died in their late teens to mid-20s. The maximum recorded age for a Tyrannosaurus Rex, based on bone ring analysis, is 28 years. She is, in this moment, 22 years old. This is a guess, but an educated one based on her size and the likely demographics of her population. She reached her full adult size approximately 4 years ago, and since then her growth rings have shown the thin, widely spaced pattern of an animal that is no longer growing rapidly, but whose bones are still slowly mineralizing and thickening, adding density without adding length. 22 is old for a T-Rex. Most of her cohort, the animals born in the same season, to mothers ranging across the same floodplain, are already dead. Killed by disease, starvation, injury from failed hunts, or competition from other individuals. She has survived them all, She will survive for perhaps another 3 to 5 years, if the available data on T-Rex lifespan is accurate. What happened at the hunt 3 days ago? Her belly is not distended whatever she ate. She ate enough of it to satisfy the immediate metabolic demand, but not so much that she is carrying a visible surplus. A successful hadrosaur kill for an adult T-Rex means perhaps 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of meat available at the carcass, of which she would have consumed 400 to 600 pounds over the course of several hours, eating in the patient, methodical way that large predators eat. Not the frenzied feeding of the movies, not the shaking and thrashing, but something slower and more deliberate. Methodical disassembly of the carcass, beginning with the most energy-rich tissues and working outward. The T-Rex bite was not primarily a killing mechanism in the way that the bites of most other large predators are. Lions and tigers and wolves kill primarily through suffocation or blood loss. They bite the throat or the muzzle and hold. But Tyrannosaurus Rex, with its enormous, deeply rooted banana-shaped teeth, was a bone crusher. Its bite went through hide and muscle and bone in a single application of force, and what it delivered to the prey was not primarily a stranglehold, but a tissue removal event of such magnitude that the prey's ability to continue standing was immediately compromised. The bite force was so large, those 12,000 pounds per square inch, that bone itself was a food source rather than an obstacle. T-Rex fossil dung, studied extensively in the past 2 decades, contains significant quantities of digested bone material, confirming that this animal consumed bone as part of its normal feeding behavior, extracting the marrow and mineral content that made bone a valuable caloric supplement to meat. None of this is happening now. Now she is simply breathing. Her great digestive system still slowly processing the meal from 3 days ago. Her metabolism running at the reduced rate of an animal in deep rest. The body temperature of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, a question that scientists have been working to answer for decades, was probably somewhat lower than the core temperature of a modern mammal, but substantially higher than that of a modern reptile of equivalent size. The analysis of oxygen isotopes in T-Rex bone suggests a core temperature of approximately 38 to 39 degrees Celsius, only slightly below the human normal, achieved through the same internal metabolic processes that warm-blooded animals use the burning of metabolic fuel to generate heat as a byproduct. She is warm, even lying against the cool sandstone. She is warm, and the warmth radiates from her body into the night air around her in a gentle, diffuse way that you can almost feel from where you sit. She knows you are here. Or rather, and this is an important distinction, she is aware of your presence in the way that a deeply resting animal is aware of a non-threatening stimulus in its environment. Something is near her. The smell center of her brain registered your scent some time ago and filed it under the category of things that do not require a response. Not prey, you are too small and you are not moving in a prey-like way. Not rival, you carry no T-Rex signature in your scent. Not immediate threat. You are, to her enormous olfactory system, a minor ambient fact about tonight's air. The way a distant smoke plume or the smell of rain on the far ridge is a fact noted, categorized, set aside. This is perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of this experience. Being near something so large and so powerful. That is, in this moment, simply not interested in you. The T-Rex's relationship to threat is calibrated by scale in a way that most people don't fully consider. The things that are dangerous to her are other T-Rexes, and the things that are dangerous in a more subtle way are the diseases and parasites and the slow erosions of age and injury. Small things are not dangerous to her in any direct sense. In an ecosystem, they are simply below her threshold of concern. Invisible, in the same way that individual bacteria are invisible to us present, but not in the range of resolution at which our threat detection system operates. You are invisible to the threat detection system of Tyrannosaurus Rex. And that invisibility is a kind of freedom, a kind of peaceful obscurity that has its own particular flavor of comfort. You can sit here, close enough to feel the warmth and hear the breathing, and be completely, functionally invisible to the largest predator that has ever lived on land. You are in the presence of power so extreme that it has looped back around to something like peace. The moon is higher now. The valley is filled with its gentle, non-directional light, and the shadows under the trees are soft rather than sharp. The river is a moving silver surface below the bank. The sandstone around the T-Rex glows almost white, and the T-Rex herself, the sleeping, breathing, ancient, extraordinary creature, is simply resting, deeply and completely, in the way that anything alive eventually must rest. The largest are not exempt from this. The most powerful are not exempt. Even the king of the Cretaceous sleeps, and in sleeping becomes something that you can sit beside in the quiet moonlit hours and feel very distantly and very quietly, something that is almost kinship. There is a lizard on the sandstone 2 feet from your left hand. It has been there for some time. You realize you simply did not notice it until this moment, because it is the color of the stone, and it is not moving, and its outline is just irregular enough to read as a small natural feature of the rock rather than as a living thing. It is watching you. The eyes of a lizard process visual information differently from your own eyes. The retina is more densely packed with cone cells for color vision. The field of view is wider. The ability to detect motion is extraordinary, while the ability to hold a stationary object in focus is somewhat weaker. You, sitting still in the moonlight, are probably marginally more interpretable as geology than as threat. The lizards of the late Cretaceous are a topic that paleontology has given relatively little attention compared to the spectacular dinosaurs and pterosaurs and marine reptiles that dominate the narrative of the period, and this is a shame because they were numerous, diverse, and ecologically important, serving as the small to medium predators that filled the spaces between the insects and the small dinosaurs. This particular animal is perhaps 8 inches long from nose to tail, with a body that is narrower and more gracile than most modern lizards of equivalent size, a long, delicate tail that makes up more than half of its total length, and scales that catch the moonlight with a faint iridescence, suggesting they are not quite the same flat pigmentation as the sandstone they rest on, but are close enough to pass in poor light. It is eating a beetle. Or rather, it ate a beetle approximately 10 seconds ago, and what remains of that event is a faint movement of the jaw as the lizard finalizes the process of swallowing. The beetle was large by insect standards, perhaps half an inch, and the lizard took it with a quick, precise strike, a dart of the head, a snap of the jaws, a brief struggle resolved immediately by the grip, and then settled back into its stillness on the stone. The whole episode lasted perhaps a second and a half. Then the lizard was stone again, and the beetle was gone, and the night continued without interruption. Not far from the lizard, something is calling from the wet margin where the river's bank flattens into a shallow, muddy shelf of exposed substrate, half water and half land, the kind of marginal habitat that a great many small creatures find useful because it offers resources from both worlds. The call is rhythmic, low, and rising slightly at its end, a sound that in any era would prompt the automatic association with amphibians, with the nighttime calling of frogs and toads, and the association is in this case not entirely wrong, though it would be technically incorrect. True frogs, as we know them today, were not yet present in this ecosystem in their modern form. But their ancestors and their relatives were here, and some of the creatures producing sounds from the wet margin tonight are recognizable as belonging to lineages that will eventually give rise to the modern amphibians. The evolution of the frog, called the inflation of a vocal sac, the expulsion of air across vibrating vocal cords, the production of a species-specific sound pattern that functions to attract mates and establish territory, is one of the oldest communication systems in the vertebrate world, predating the dinosaurs by a considerable margin. The frogs were calling in the Cretaceous night. The frogs were calling in the Jurassic. The frogs were calling in the Triassic. The frogs have been calling for a very long time, and the call you hear tonight is part of an unbroken chain of nighttime amphibian communication that stretches back beyond the age of dinosaurs and forward past their extinction and into the night of your own world, where somewhere, right now, a frog is calling in a pond or a marsh or a roadside ditch, using the same basic mechanism, serving the same basic function, making the same basic sound. You have heard a sound tonight that has not changed in 67 million years. Sit with that for a moment. The river, the wind, the frog. Some things do not need to change because they are already doing the thing they need to do with perfect efficiency. And the test of 67 million years has confirmed that efficiency beyond any reasonable doubt. Among the lizards and the amphibians and the small mammals, there were also snakes. Not as we fully know them today, the most advanced snake lineages, including the constrictors and the venomous species, would develop primarily after the extinction event, but the ancestors of modern snakes were present, transitional forms still in the process of losing their limbs and reconfiguring their body plans for the entirely legless existence that would eventually make snakes one of the most successful reptile groups on Earth. These ancestral snakes were smaller than most people imagine, and they spent much of their time in the dense cover of the forest floor where their slim, elongated bodies gave them access to the tunnels and crevices in the root systems and leaf litter where many of their prey species lived. One passes through the fern, clumps at the forest edge, moving with the smooth, wave-like motion of a snake, its body making a soft rustle in the dry parts of the leaf litter, a hush in the wet parts, a sound that is essentially continuous and essentially uniform and essentially very quiet. It does not seem to notice or care about any of the other animals in its immediate vicinity. It is following a scent trail, probably a small lizard or a sleeping mammal with the focused, sensory-driven determination of a predator whose entire body has become a sense organ, every scale in contact with the ground conveying vibration information to a nervous system, tuned to detect the slight but distinct difference between the vibration signature of moving prey and the vibration signature of everything else. The lizard on the sandstone tracks the snake's passage with a slight rotation of one eye, but does not otherwise react. It is bigger than what the snake hunts. The snake passes and is gone into the forest, its passage marked only by the slight disturbance of fern fronds closing behind it, and the night settles back. Here is a question to carry into the dark. What was the rarest animal in this valley? Not the largest, not the most dramatic, the rarest. The one that was here but barely here, that barely tipped the scales of the ecosystem's balance. It was probably not a dinosaur. The large animals of any ecosystem are actually not as rare as we tend to assume. They are visible and memorable, which makes them feel significant. But their actual density per square kilometer is low. The rarest creatures are typically the specialists, the animals that have evolved to occupy a very narrow and specific ecological niche, and are therefore dependent on the exact maintenance of that niche for their survival. A small pterosaur that feeds on a specific type of fish that lives in a specific type of riverine habitat. A parasitic insect that requires a specific host species. A small mammal that depends on a specific forest microhabitat that forms only when a particular combination of tree species grow together. We will never know who the rarest animal in this valley was. Their bones, if they left bones at all, may have dissolved before they could be preserved, or were preserved in a location that has since been destroyed by geology, or are sitting in a rock formation that has not yet been found. The fossil record is a sample, not a census, and it is a sample biased toward the large and the hard-boned and the abundant. The rare specialists of the Cretaceous night are mostly gone without a trace, taking with them whatever particular and unrepeatable solutions to the problem of living they had developed. This is not a sad thought, or rather, it is a sad thought only if you resist it, only if you hold on to the idea that things ought to be preserved simply because they existed and were remarkable. The Cretaceous night is full of things that have not been preserved, and the fact of their presence here, now, in the breathing warm dark around you, does not depend on their being remembered. They are here, that is enough. The lizard on the sandstone is here. The snake in the ferns is here. The small marsupial in the canopy is here. None of them know they are remarkable. None of them know they are temporary. They are simply being what they are, in the time they have, in the world they were given. There is a teaching in that, if you want one, but tonight it is probably enough to simply notice it and let it settle, and let your eyes grow heavy, and let the small world of the forest edge do its small world things around you in the dark. Move with the dream now. Let it carry you upstream, following the river's bend away from the T-Rex's sandstone, and through a narrowing of the valley where two low ridges converge and the forest thickens on both sides. The conifers here taller and older and their trunks thicker, the oldest of them perhaps 200 feet tall, rising from root systems that have been growing for a century and pressing their bark against the sky in a column of grey-brown that catches the moonlight and turns it into something structural, something that makes the forest feel like a cathedral built by something that had no concept of architecture, but achieved it anyway through pure biological persistence. The upper valley opens beyond the ridges, wider and flatter than the lower ground near the river, a broad flood terrace that the river has built over thousands of years of seasonal spreading, depositing the fine silt and clay that makes this ground so extraordinarily fertile, so dense with the plant life that feeds the great herds that move through it. And here, on the flood terrace in the moonlight, is a group of Triceratops. There are 7 of them. They are arranged in a loose scatter across the open ground, each one at least 20 to 30 feet from its nearest neighbor, a spacing that reflects a certain degree of independence even within their social grouping. Triceratops was gregarious, but not densely so, occupying a social register somewhere between the tight clustering of the hadrosaur herds and the largely solitary ranging of the T-Rex. They know each other. They have been ranging together in this part of the valley for months, possibly for years, and their familiarity is evident in the lack of any tension between them. In the unhurried quality of their spacing, in the way they occasionally drift a few steps toward each other, and then drift away again without any apparent purpose or destination. A Triceratops up close is one of the most visually striking things the Cretaceous has to offer. The size is part of it. A full adult weighs 8 to 12 tons, roughly equivalent to 2 large African elephants, and stands about 10 feet at the hip, its body broader and more massive than that of most other dinosaurs of equivalent length. But what arrests attention is the head. The head of Triceratops is enormous, even by the standards of its enormous body, accounting for roughly a third of the animal's total length and carrying the full spectacular apparatus of its defensive and display structures. The 3 horns, the nasal horn above the snout approximately 2 feet long, and the 2 brow horns above the eyes that can grow to 3 feet or more in mature adults, curving slightly forward and outward in a way that is simultaneously elegant and unmistakably dangerous. And behind all of that, the frill, the great bony frill that extends from the back of the skull in a broad, roughly triangular or slightly scalloped sheet, up to 3 feet high in large individuals, vascularized by a network of blood vessels that gave it in life a flushed, colored quality. The frills are visible in the moonlight. 7 large heads with their extraordinary structural extensions standing above the flood terrace, catching the silver light, each one unique in the subtle details of its shape and proportions, in the way that any individual's features are unique from any others. The frills are not identical between individuals. They vary in size, in the degree of scalloping at the edge, in the arrangement of the smaller bony structures called epicypitals that line the frill's rim. These variations are the Triceratops version of faces. They are the features that their companions recognize them by, that signal identity within the group, that convey the information about age and health and social status that governs relationships in any complex social system. What was in the frill that made it colored? This is one of the more exciting recent discoveries in Triceratops paleontology. The blood vessel channels preserved in fossilized Triceratops frills are larger and more numerous than would be needed for simple structural supply, and their arrangement is consistent with what is seen in the brightly colored, highly vascularized display structures of modern animals, the dewlaps of lizards, the facial skin of mandrill baboons, the combs of roosters. The inference most paleontologists now draw from this evidence is that the Triceratops frill was capable of significant color change through differential blood flow, flushing red or orange or yellow in states of arousal or threat display, and potentially showing more muted tones in states of calm. At rest, like this, on a quiet moonlit night, when no threat is present and no competition is active, the frills probably show their baseline coloration, perhaps a warm tan or a reddish brown, the underlying colors of the bony structure without the overlay of blood-engorged tissue. The largest individual in the group, a female probably, given the evidence that female Triceratops were in many populations larger than males, a pattern called female-biased sexual-size dimorphism that also appears in some crocodilians and birds, has settled into a resting posture that uses the gentle slope of the flood terrace to take some of the weight off her forelegs. She is not lying flat the way the T-Rex is, not committed to full-body rest. She is instead in a posture that might be described as 3/4 rest, her body lowered slightly but not fully onto the ground, her legs bent enough to reduce their burden without fully releasing their readiness. It is a posture that allows rapid response to threat. She can be on her feet in seconds from this position, but that also offers some muscular relief, some reduction of the constant load-bearing that an animal of this size must manage even when standing still. Her eyes are half closed. The eyelids of a Triceratops are not particularly remarkable. Anatomically, they close the same basic mechanism that most vertebrate eyes use, but the expression they produce, the half-lidded, slowly blinking quality of an animal on the comfortable edge of sleep, is one of the most unexpectedly familiar things in this ancient landscape. You have seen that expression. You know what it means. The very universality of it. The fact that the approach of sleep produces the same outward sign in a creature 67 million years removed from your own biology. 'Tis one of those moments where the distance collapses, and you feel not separated from the Cretaceous by geological time, but connected to it by something more basic and more durable than geology. The horns catch the moon. In the stillness of the flood terrace, the three brow horns and the nasal horn of each individual Triceratops are briefly illuminated as the moon moves through a gap in the high clouds that have begun to drift across the sky from the west. Each horn is a gleam, a brief specificity in the general silver grey of the landscape. And then the cloud closes, and the illumination softens, and the Triceratops are once again shapes in the ambient light, large and quiet and at rest. Here is a fact about Triceratops that changed everything science thought it knew about this animal. Discovered in the early 2000s. Triceratops and Torosaurus, long considered two separate species of ceratopsian, are now thought by many paleontologists to actually be the same species, with Torosaurus representing the fully mature adult form and Triceratops the subadult. The evidence comes from bone histology and growth ring analysis, showing that the skull structures of the two forms are in different states of developmental completion, with the Triceratops skull retaining features of immaturity and the Torosaurus skull showing the fully fused, remodeled architecture of an adult. If this interpretation is correct, then the iconic Triceratops frill was actually a juvenile and young adult feature, and the mature adults looked significantly different, with a larger frill penetrated by large openings that reduced its weight while maintaining its visual impact. The animals before you tonight may be subadults. Their fully adult forms, if they survive another decade or so, will look different from what you see now. Let this be a useful reminder that the Cretaceous is not finished being understood. Every year, the picture changes. Every year, a new fossil, a new analytical technique, a new theoretical framework revises something that seemed settled. The world of 67 million years ago is not a fixed thing in a museum case. It is an ongoing investigation, a mystery that science keeps opening further the more carefully it is examined. And that open quality, the fact that the ancient world is not finished revealing itself, means that in some sense it is not entirely past. It is still happening, still being discovered, still surprising us, still demonstrating, in whatever way mysteries demonstrate things, that the universe we inhabit is more interesting than any account of it we have yet been able to give. The Triceratops breathe. The flood terrace holds them gently in the moonlight. The clouds drift. And upstream, even further into the dark, the river continues on its way toward the sea, carrying its freight of stars and pollen and the invisible seeds of future forests through the quiet Cretaceous night. There is an hour before dawn, not the hour immediately before dawn, not the thinning dark that comes just before the first light, but the hour before that, the deepest and most complete darkness of the night. When the moon has set and the stars are alone in the sky, and the temperature has dropped to its nightly minimum, and everything alive in the Cretaceous Valley is as close to stillness as it ever gets. This is the hour you are in now, the darkest hour. Not in the sense of any difficulty or suffering, just the literal darkest, the least light, the furthest point in the arc of the night from the sun. In this darkness, sound is the primary sense. The insects are still singing, but lower now, their chorus diminished by the slight drop in temperature that has quieted some of the more temperature-sensitive species, while others have taken on a prominence they didn't have earlier. A single insect, very close to you, some kind of long-horned orthopteran, a distant ancestor of the katydids, is producing a sound that is almost meditative in its regularity. 3 short pulses and a longer one repeated at intervals of about 4 seconds, reliable and unhurried, the biological metronome of the darkest part of the Cretaceous night. You can orient yourself by the river even in this darkness. Its sound is always there. Below and to your left if you are facing roughly north. Varying in its texture as the wind shifts, but always present, always moving, always providing that fundamental reference point of flowing water that every creature in this valley uses to understand where it is. The river is the spine of this landscape. Everything else, the meadows, the forest stands, the sandstone outcrops, the flood terraces, is organized in relation to it, and the creatures that inhabit those places carry the river's location in their nervous systems the way you carry the location of walls and doors in a familiar room. The T-Rex has shifted. Not significantly, she has not risen, has not moved far from her stone, but in the complete darkness of this hour, you can hear a change in the quality of her breathing, a slight increase in rate, a quality of altered rhythm that suggests she has moved from her deepest rest into a lighter phase, the kind of transition that happens naturally in the sleep cycles of most complex animals as the body cycles through different levels of neural activity. If she were a mammal, you might say she was entering something like the equivalent of a light sleep phase, the body hovering closer to wakefulness without actually arriving there. Does the T-Rex dream in these lighter phases? The question of reptilian dreaming has been studied with increasing sophistication over the past decade, and what has emerged is genuinely surprising. Several lizard species have been observed to display the characteristic rapid eye movements and irregular breathing patterns associated with REM sleep in mammals, the sleep phase during which dreaming in humans predominantly occurs. The neural correlates of this state have been traced in lizard brains, and they share features with the mammalian REM state that are striking enough to suggest a common evolutionary origin predating the divergence of the lineages that led to reptiles and mammals. If lizards dream, and the evidence suggests they do, then the argument for dinosaurs dreaming becomes considerably more plausible. What the T-Rex dreams about, if she dreams, is somewhere between unknowable and imaginable. The brain structures associated with processing olfactory memory in dinosaurs were large and well developed. We know this from endocranial casts, the fossils of brain impressions in skull interiors which show the relative sizes of different brain regions. An animal with brain architecture dominated by olfactory processing would presumably have memories organized primarily around scent. This is how the territory smells in dry weather. This is the particular quality of air that carries the hadrosaur herd before visual contact. This is the smell of rain on the sandstone. These are not abstractions. They are the concrete neural records of a life lived through the nose, and in the lighter sleep phases they may replay in some form a slow slideshow of scent memories that keeps the brain exercised without requiring the body to do anything at all. While she rests in her lighter sleep, the valley does something it only does in the deepest dark. It gets very quiet. Not silent, the insects continue. The river continues, but quiet in a way that feels qualitatively different from the active, layered sound of the earlier night. The hadrosaurs have settled deeply. The Ankylosaurus is motionless on the meadow floor, its breathing so slow and so quiet now that it blends entirely with the ambient sound of the landscape. The pterosaurs on their cliff ledge are still, their heads tucked, their wings folded tight against the night air. The small mammals and the lizards have completed their active periods and found their hiding places. The Troodon has finished its hunting and is somewhere in the upper forest, roosting like the bird it very nearly is, its small warm body tucked into a hollow in the bark of an old conifer. And you? Where are you? In this deep quiet. You are exactly where you need to be here. In this, breathing the dark air, feeling the warmth of the Cretaceous night against your skin, listening to the 3-pulse and long song of the orthopteron near your left ear, feeling the ground hold you with the patient, impersonal solidity that the ground has been offering to living things since the first animals ventured onto land nearly 400 million years ago. You are held. You are warm. You are as safe as anything in this world is ever safe. Here is something remarkable about the hour before dawn that science has only recently been able to confirm through monitoring of large prehistoric ecosystem analogues, modern environments with megafauna populations studied in detail. The activity levels of large predators correlate strongly with the activity levels of their prey. And in ecosystems where the prey animals enter their deepest rest phases in the pre-dawn dark, the predators show corresponding reductions in activity. The T-Rex, calibrated by millions of years of evolutionary pressure to her prey's rhythms, is at her least active when the hadrosaurs are at their most rested. This is not cooperation, it is pure predator-prey dynamics, the evolutionary negotiation of activity schedules that allows prey animals to take their necessary rest without the risk of being caught in maximum vulnerability. But the practical effect, tonight, in this valley, is that the deepest dark is the safest time, the time when the predator is most fully committed to its own rest, and the ecosystem can breathe as freely as it ever breathes. The air has a different quality in this hour, cooler, as already mentioned, but also somehow denser, as if the night has accumulated itself, thickened with its own accumulation of darkness and the exhalations of all the living things that have been breathing into it for the past several hours. The smell of the river is stronger. Cold water carries scent differently than warm water, the volatile compounds more persistent in the cool air, the mineral smell of the moving water more prominent. The flowers along the riverbank have pulled their petals slightly closed, the way many flowering plants do in response to temperature drop, reducing transpiration and protecting their pollen from the damp air, and the closing has reduced their scent output, so that what you smell now is the underlying forest smell, bark and earth, and the faintly spicy quality of the conifer resin that the night air has been carrying all along but that the flower scents had been masking. Breathe it in. The cold flower, the warm bark, the water, the earth. These smells have been in this valley for a very long time. They were here before the T-Rex was born. They were here when the dinosaurs that preceded her in this landscape were alive. They will be here when she is gone. Smell is perhaps the most conservative of all the senses in evolutionary terms, the one that has changed least over the deepest spans of time, and what you breathe in the Cretaceous night is not so different from what you would breathe in a dense, warm, ancient forest in your own world. The chemicals are the same, the molecules are the same. Only the specific mixture, the specific combination of species producing the specific compounds, has changed. Let the night be what it is. Let this deepest hour hold you exactly as it holds everything else in this valley, without opinion, without agenda, without anything being asked of you except your presence and your willingness to keep breathing, which requires no effort at all, which the body does on its own, has always done on its own, will always do as long as you let it, in and out, slow and deep. The way the hadrosaurs breathe, the way the T-Rex breathes, the way the river breathes, in its own riverway, pulling its surface into the air and putting it back again, over and over, in the evaporation and rain cycle that has been the breath of the planet since before any animal existed to breathe it. The first indication of dawn is not light. The eye is not the instrument that receives it first. What comes first, imperceptibly, is a change in the quality of the birdsong, or what passes for birdsong in the late Cretaceous, which is to say the calls of the early birds that have been establishing themselves in increasing numbers throughout this period, the small enantiornithine birds, and the more advanced aviolans that cluster in the tree canopy, and whose morning calls precede sunrise by a reliable margin, triggered not by light itself, but by the barely perceptible lengthening of the photoperiod that is detectable by nervous systems fine-tuned to the astronomical clock of the seasons. One voice first, then another, then a small ensemble, not loud, not dramatic, a quiet biological announcement that the night is beginning to negotiate with the day, that the long dark is starting the slow process of becoming something else. Then the smell changes, the pre-dawn shift in air movement as the ground cools to its minimum and the cooler, denser air begins to pool in the valley and flows slowly toward the river, carries new scents from the forest interior, the morning breath of the trees releasing their nighttime accumulation of volatile compounds. It smells, very faintly, of a beginning. There is no other way to describe it. The smell of the world preparing to come back to itself. The T-Rex is more awake. Not fully, she has not risen, is not on her feet, has not committed to the day but the lightening of the sky's darkness. Even this subtle beginning of lightning that the eye can barely register has shifted her from her pre-dawn lighter sleep into something closer to wakefulness. You can hear it in her breathing. Faster now, the rhythm shortened, the inhalations and exhalations carrying more purpose, as if the body is reminding itself of its daytime business, testing its own systems, checking in. Her tail makes longer sweeps across the stone. Her head shifts, just slightly. In a way that carries weight, the enormous skull rolling from its nighttime angle to a slightly different position, the jaw briefly tightening and releasing in a reflex that shows the system coming online. Will she hunt today? This is the question that has been implicit throughout the night, the question that the title of this story has been holding open. And the answer, based on the biology, is probably not. Not today. The meal from 3 days ago has provided enough caloric reserve to carry her through at least 2 more days of low activity. And the energetic cost of a major hunt, the burst speed, the contact, the processing of a large kill is high enough that the decision to hunt is never made lightly by a large predator in evolutionary terms. There is no anthropomorphic deliberation here, no conscious cost-benefit analysis, but the evolved behavior, calibrated over millions of years of natural selection, produces the same practical result. She will range today, she will observe, she will maintain her sensory awareness of the territory and its occupants, but she will not commit to a major hunt until the internal signals that govern her feeding behavior, the dropping blood sugar, the metabolic signals of depleted reserves, the specific quality of hunger that the hypothalamus produces when nutrient stores reach a critical level, tell her that the cost of not hunting has exceeded the cost of hunting. That day is probably 2 days away. Today she will be present in the valley in a different mode, a mode that the prey animals will recognize and respond to differently than they respond to active hunting, a mode of maintained presence and observation that still pressurizes the ecosystem but does not produce the specific alarm that active pursuit triggers. She will walk. She will drink from the river. She will rest in a different location, probably in the shade of the upper forest where the temperature stays cooler through the afternoon. And then she will rest again, and the valley will continue its ancient rhythms around her, everyone calibrated to her rhythms, the way a community of animals calibrates to the rhythms of anything large and consistent in its environment. She rises. The moment itself is extraordinary and slow. The first movement is the head, lifting from the ground in a series of careful increments, the neck straightening as the weight comes off the sandstone, the skull swinging slightly from side to side, in the characteristic T-Rex movement of orientation, the olfactory system sampling the morning air from slightly different angles, building a three-dimensional picture of the world's current state from the information contained in the smell. She is reading the night, learning what it contains, processing the accumulated chemical information of the past several hours in the first seconds of wakefulness. Then the body follows. The legs unfold from their resting position with a slowness that is almost meditative, the joints extending one at a time, the weight redistributing across the feet as they flatten against the stone, the tail coming up to its operational horizontal position as the center of balance shifts forward over the new foot placement. It takes perhaps 30 seconds. 30 seconds for something that weighs 6 or 7 tons to rise from the ground and achieve its full operational height, and in those 30 seconds the entire valley registers the event. In some way the hadrosaurs' heads come up a degree. The triceratops on the flood terrace take a step or two closer together. The small mammals in their burrows feel the vibration of those feet on the stone and go still in their small mammal way. But she is not alarmed. And because she is not alarmed, the alarm she generates in others is lower than it would be if she were actively hunting. The difference is detectable. It is detectable by everything in this valley that has learned her rhythms, and the difference tonight or this morning, now, as the sky begins its first real suggestion of light, is that she is rising at dawn in the unhurried, slightly stiff way of an animal that has rested well and is beginning its day at its own pace. Not the taut, quiet, pre-hunt alertness that produces maximum vigilance in the surrounding animals, just the morning rising of a large predator going about its business. She turns toward the river. Her feet on the stone are quiet. The footpads of a Tyrannosaurus Rex were not the scaly, clattering things of movie dinosaurs, but broad, cushioned, designed to distribute the enormous weight across a wide surface and to make contact with the ground in a rolling motion that minimizes impact sound. She moves off the sandstone and onto the forest floor, and the sound of her passage is a low, rhythmic percussion, not the crashing one might expect, but something more like the sound of a very large dog walking on a wooden floor, purposeful and steady, and not particularly concerned with silence. Because at this size, silence is largely irrelevant. You watch her go, the enormous body moving through the trees at the meadow's edge, the tail held horizontal and swaying slightly with each step, the head carried forward on the slightly downward angle that is typical of T-Rex locomotion, the forelimbs folded against the chest in their compact, ready position. She does not look back. There is nothing in this landscape that she needs to look back at. She moves toward the river in a straight, unhurried line, and the forest accepts her passage, the way all forests accept the passage of the things that live in them with minor adjustments, brief disturbances of leaf and branch that resettle quickly in her wake, leaving the landscape very nearly as it was before she moved through it. And then she is gone, around the bend, toward the river, and the sound of her steps fades, and the forest that was briefly organized around her passage returns to its morning self, its own sounds coming back, the bird song growing in confidence now, the insects adjusting their chorus to the rising light, the first small mammals venturing out from their nighttime hiding places into the soft grey-green illumination of the early Cretaceous morning. The night the T-Rex didn't hunt is over. She will not hunt today either, probably, and the valley will continue, full of its complex, layered life, its predators and prey, and small things and large things, and ancient things and new things, all of them going about their irreplaceable business in the irreplaceable present of 67 million years ago. The night is over. The day begins. And in the morning light, gentle and oblique and slowly brightening, the world is exactly what it has always been and will always be, astonishing and real and going on. Somewhere in the sandstone of this valley, something is being made. Not tonight. Nothing so dramatic as to be visible in a single night. But the process has been underway for a very long time, and it will continue long after the last animal alive in this valley has lived its life and returned to the earth that made it. The process is fossilization, and while it is usually described as a kind of preservation, it is more accurately described as a kind of conversation between the living and the geological, a slow negotiation in which the biological is gradually replaced by the mineral, each molecule of original material swapped for a molecule of stone, in a process so patient and so thorough that what emerges on the far end, millions of years later, is something that carries the shape of the original, but is composed entirely of different substance. Most of the creatures in this valley will not be fossilized. The statistics are sobering. For every organism that leaves a recoverable fossil, tens of millions die without a trace, their biological matter decomposed and returned to the nutrient cycle before any mineralizing process can begin. The conditions for fossilization are specific and unusual. Burial in sediment that is chemically favorable for mineral replacement, rapid enough burial to exclude the decomposers that would otherwise consume the soft tissue and eventually the hard tissue too, and preservation, in a geological context, that is protected from the heat and pressure that would eventually destroy even a well-formed fossil if the surrounding rock is subjected to sufficient metamorphic force. The T-Rex that just walked toward the river has a better chance of being fossilized than most creatures here. Her bones are dense and large and mineralically rich, and the floodplain environment through which she ranges is one that regularly deposits fine sediment over the low-lying areas. If she were to die in the right location in a river bend where sediment accumulates rapidly on a flood terrace that gets buried regularly by seasonal flooding, and if she were buried quickly enough to exclude the scavengers that would otherwise consume her bones within weeks, then some portion of her skeleton might enter the geological record. The chances are still small, but they are not zero. 67 million years from now, on a morning that has not yet arrived, a woman in work boots and a faded canvas jacket will be climbing a weathered badland ridge in what was once this valley and is now a dry, eroded landscape of pale sedimentary rock. She will have been climbing this same ridge system for 3 seasons, working systematically through a geological horizon that her research suggests corresponds to the late Cretaceous floodplain sediments. She knows what she is looking for. She has found pieces before isolated teeth, fragments of bone, impressions that might be footprints but nothing complete, nothing that would warrant the multi-month excavation that a significant specimen requires. On this particular morning, the light falls at the angle that experienced fossil hunters learn to read. The low, raking illumination that throws even small surface irregularities into high relief, that makes a piece of bone projecting 2 millimeters from the surrounding rock visible when it would be invisible in the flat light of midday. She is walking slowly, her eyes on the ground, her mind in the particular state of quiet, focused alertness that long field seasons produce in fossil hunters, not looking for anything specific, looking at everything, letting the visual system do its pattern recognition work without the interference of too much conscious direction. She sees it, a curve of dark material, richer in color than the pale tan of the surrounding sandstone, protruding from the slope at the angle that bone typically protrudes from eroding sediment when it has been cut by the slow work of weather. She kneels. She pulls out the small brush that she carries in her jacket pocket and clears the dust from the surface of the exposure with careful, unhurried strokes. The material beneath is dense and dark brown and has the characteristic texture of fossil bone, not smooth, not uniform, but patterned with the internal architecture of a cancellous bone structure, the porous framework that once held marrow and blood vessels and living tissue, and that now holds only stone. She does not know what she is looking at yet. It will take weeks to find out, but she calls out to her field partner, who is working the next section over, and the two of them kneel side by side in the morning sun of the far future, and look at the place where the Cretaceous is whispering back to them through 67 million years of stone. This is what the valley was keeping. This is what the river was protecting with its slow, seasonal burial. This is what the geology was patiently mineralizing through the long millions of years between this night and that morning. A bridge between worlds, built out of patience and chemistry and the blind persistence of matter doing what matter does when the conditions are right. The bone, whatever it turns out to be, whichever animal it belongs to, has been in the stone for 67 million years. It was alive here. It was part of a creature that breathed this air and drank this water and moved through this landscape. And the stone has been keeping it, all this time, the way any faithful keeper keeps something entrusted to them without drama, without announcement, simply holding it intact against the passage of time until the moment when someone who can receive it arrives. What do the fossils tell us that we have not yet heard? This is the best question in paleontology, and the honest answer is an enormous amount. The fossil record of the late Cretaceous is, by the standards of paleontology, relatively well sampled the Hell Creek Formation of the American West, which corresponds roughly to the type of environment in this valley, has been studied intensively for over 150 years and has yielded thousands of specimens. But the Hell Creek Formation covers a vast area and has been deeply sampled in only a small proportion of its extent, and the bias of the record toward large animals. Toward animals that died in the right places, toward geological contexts that have been exposed by erosion and found by researchers, means that the portrait it offers of the late Cretaceous ecosystem is partial in ways that are difficult to fully account for. There are categories of animals from this environment that we know almost nothing about. The small mammals, which we know existed in considerable diversity from isolated teeth and jaw fragments, have left almost no associated skeletal material that would allow us to understand their full anatomical range. The insects are represented almost entirely from amber deposits in other parts of the world, not from the interior floodplains of North America. The soft-bodied invertebrates, the worms, the slugs, the caterpillars, the aquatic larvae, are essentially absent from the record. The plants are better represented than any of these, but even the plant record has enormous gaps, particularly in the representation of the least woody, most perishable species. Every fossil is a letter from the Cretaceous that arrived after a very long delay, and, like any letter that has traveled a very long time, it is incomplete, some words smudged, some pages missing, some passages rendered ambiguous by the journey. But the letters that do arrive are extraordinary. They carry in them, locked in their mineral structure, the specific, irreplaceable reality of a specific organism that lived in a specific place at a specific time. They are not generalizations. They are individuals. The T-Rex that has been sleeping by her stone tonight will eventually, in some version of this story, leave some portion of herself in the stone, and that portion will carry her individuality into the future as surely as any name carved in any monument. The valley holds its sleeping creatures in the soft pre-dawn light. The stone holds its future fossils in the patient dark below. And you, here, in this moment between sleeping and waking, between the Cretaceous and your own world, hold something that neither the creatures nor the stone can hold. The awareness that all of this is extraordinary, that the deep past was real, that the long night is a gift, that every breath drawn in this ancient air is a breath drawn from the same planetary system, the same molecular heritage, the same ancient Earth that will still be breathing long after everything currently living has become, in its own way, something the stone keeps. The light is coming, not dramatically, not all at once. The Cretaceous dawn is the same patient, incremental thing that dawns have always been, a slow brightening of the sky from its darkest east-facing edge, the black giving way to dark blue, the dark blue to something lighter and more uncertain, the horizon beginning to define itself against the sky in a way that makes the world seem more specific, more located, more real than it was in the undifferentiated dark. The birds in the canopy have increased their volume. The hadrosaur herd in the meadow is beginning to stir, heads lifting, the first tentative steps of the morning as the animals begin to remember the practical details of being alive and large, and in need of a considerable quantity of plant material every day. You are very tired. This is noticed rather than felt as any kind of discomfort, a heaviness in the body, a softening of the edges of perception, a willingness to let things become slightly less focused, slightly less specific, slightly more like the quality of things in the moment before sleep takes over completely. The Cretaceous around you has not changed. It continues to be exactly what it has been all night, warm, layered, alive, ancient, patient, but your relationship to it has shifted slightly. The way your relationship to anything shifts when sleep is near, when the body's claim on consciousness becomes more insistent than the mind's interest in remaining awake. The T-Rex, at the river now, is drinking. You cannot see her from here. She is around the bend, in the wide, shallow stretch of water where the river pools slightly before continuing downstream, but you can hear her. The sound of an animal of her size drinking from a river is distinctive. Long, deep, rhythmic inhalations of water, each one pulling a volume of fluid that is almost absurd by the standards of most animals, separated by pauses in which she lifts her head and surveys the river and the banks with the quick, comprehensive scan that predators perform automatically and ceaselessly throughout their waking hours. She is not hunting, she is drinking. These are different things with very different acoustic signatures, and the valley knows the difference, even as it begins the slow recalibration of a new day. The hadrosaurs in the meadow have grouped slightly more tightly now, acknowledging her presence through a small contraction of their usual spacing. A drawing together that is not flight and not panic, but just the simple, automatic adjustment that comes with the awareness of a predator in the general vicinity. They will resume their normal spacing when she moves away from the river and into the forest. They know her rhythms, she knows theirs. The dance of predator and prey is not a dance of terror, not primarily, it is a dance of calibration, of mutual adjustment, of the ongoing negotiation between the hunger of the hunter and the wariness of the hunted. And it is a dance they have been performing together, she and these particular hadrosaurs, for the years of her territory and their ranging within it. The morning is coming and you are drifting. Both things are true simultaneously. The world you are leaving continues to unfold. The hadrosaurs will begin to browse within the hour, moving through the meadow edge in their loose, sociable way, stripping the early morning vegetation that the night's cooling has made slightly more tender, their extraordinary dental batteries processing the leaves in that smooth, efficient motion that paleontologists can read in the wear patterns preserved in fossilized jaws. The pterosaurs will come off their cliff ledge roost as the air warms and the thermals begin to form, launching themselves into the morning sky with the awkward, bundling takeoff that ground-launched pterosaurs used before they caught the air and became, instantly, creatures of grace. The small mammals will retreat to their burrows and their canopy hollows as the light increases and their nocturnal advantage diminishes. The troodontid will have found its roost by now, tucked away in the high branches, eyes closed, its small warm body adding its heat to the slowly warming morning air. And the T-Rex will drink and turn and walk into the forest, and the valley will orient itself around her presence, as it always does, acknowledging her, accommodating her, incorporating her into the living calculation of who goes where and when, and in what order. She is the organizing principle of this landscape, not because she commands it, not because anything so intentional happens between a predator and an ecosystem, but because she is the largest thing here, and the most dangerous, and the most present, and evolution has taught everything else in this valley to keep track of her. She is the center of gravity of this world, even at rest, even between hunts, even on the quiet nights when the world forgets to be afraid. You are almost asleep. Let the almost sleep be enough. Let the boundary between this ancient world and the world of your own rest become permeable, soft. The way boundaries always become soft when the body finally lets go of its vigilance. The Cretaceous night, or this morning now, this beginning of day will continue without you. It does not need your attention to proceed. It has been proceeding for 67 million years without any human attention at all, and it will go on being real, being extraordinary, being itself, in the quiet geological dark of the past, undisturbed and complete. The river carries the morning light now. Even here, even at this angle, the first true light of the Cretaceous morning is reaching the water's surface and making it briefly silver, making it briefly distinct from the darker ground on either side, marking it as a thing of movement in a world of stillness. The T-Rex's prints are in the muddy bank beside the river, 2 of them, side by side, each one larger than a car tire, pressed deep into the clay by the weight of her morning drink. She has moved on, the prints remain. For a moment, then the river, restless and generous, will lap at the bank and soften their edges, and eventually erase them, the way rivers erase everything they can reach, the way time erases everything that rivers can't, or not erase, preserve. Sometimes rivers preserve. Sometimes the clay hardens and the footprint lasts. Sometimes what was pressed into the soft bank of a Cretaceous river remains pressed there, more and more firmly as the clay dries and mineralizes, and the river changes course and the surrounding sediment accumulates around the preserved impression and holds it intact through the slow revolution of geological time. Sometimes, 67 million years from now, someone finds it. Sometimes the valley keeps what it was given. Let your eyes close. Let the sounds of the morning come and go through the soft membrane of almost sleep. The birds, the insects, the river, the distant percussion of hadrosaur footsteps in the meadow. Let the warmth of the Cretaceous morning lie along your body like the first warmth of any morning, familiar and gentle and without demand. Let the T-Rex walk in the forest at the edges of your awareness, her footsteps finding their own rhythm, her vast body moving through the ancient trees in the manner of all things that have always been there naturally, without effort, without self-consciousness. Simply being the thing they are in the world that made them. You were here. On this particular night, 67 million years ago, in a valley that has no name, beside a river that carries no memory, you were here. You heard the insects, and the water, and the breathing of the largest predator that ever lived. You lay on the warm earth of the Cretaceous floodplain, and you looked at the stars, and they were almost the same stars that you know, slightly shifted, slightly different in their arrangement, but burning with the same ancient fire, sending their light into the same universe, falling on a world that was not your world, but that was, in some deep sense, made of the same material and governed by the same rules and running on the same patient engine of time and chemistry and life that makes your world go too. The valley goes on without you. This is not loss. This is the natural condition of a world that does not need you in order to be extraordinary, that was extraordinary before you arrived and will go on being extraordinary after you leave, and that asks of you only, in this last moment of contact, that you carry something of it back with you. A warmth, a sound, the memory of breathing, the knowledge that the night has always been this deep and this full and this patient with everything that rests inside it. Take that with you, back into your own sleep, your own night, your own small, extraordinary life. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. And if sleep is still finding its way to you, there is no hurry. The night is patient. The night has always been patient, long before there were words for it, and long after words have ceased to matter. The night goes on doing what it has always done, holding the world gently inside it, making space for rest, giving back the day's accumulated weight one breath at a time. Let your body be heavy. Let the mattress beneath you become the warm earth of the Cretaceous floodplain, shaped by time to receive exactly you, holding you in exactly the position that rest requires. You are supported. You have always been supported. The ground has been holding living things for 400 million years, and it is holding you now with the same patient, impersonal generosity. Let your breath slow. 3 counts in, 4 counts out. The T-Rex breathes this slowly. The hadrosaurs breathe this slowly. Everything large and at rest breathes this slowly. The body taking what it needs and releasing the rest. Taking and releasing, in the rhythm that is older than sleep itself. The river is still running. You cannot hear it anymore. But it is there. It has always been there, moving through the dark of the ancient valley, carrying its cargo of stars and pollen, and the mineral memory of mountains into the slow sea. It does not need to be heard to be real. It does not need your attention to continue. It goes on. Everything goes on. The Cretaceous goes on in the deep past, complete and whole and real, and the world you will wake to goes on in the future, complete and whole and real, and between them you rest, exactly here, in the thin, warm present that is all any of us ever actually inhabit. Let the sounds you can hear become the sounds of the ancient valley. The distant traffic is a river. The house settling is the sandstone. The wind outside is the wind through conifers, 67 million years old, pulling a long sigh of sound from the needles, a sound that has no name but that carries in it, precisely, the feeling of a world at peace with what it is. Sleep now. The T-Rex is resting by her stone. The valley is quiet. The stars wheel in their long, slow arc above everything, and somewhere in the warm dark of the deepest Cretaceous night, something that has been singing since before the dinosaurs were born is still singing, will always be singing, patient and rhythmic and without any need to stop, offering the oldest comfort there is to everything that is alive enough to need it. Sleep. The world is safe tonight. The night holds you. The ancient earth holds you. The long, patient, extraordinary story of life on this planet holds you. Every breath you breathe, a thread in something so vast and so deep that no single night could ever contain it, but that this night, this particular night, has offered you a small window into, a brief and genuine glimpse of the real darkness, the real warmth, the real ancient music of a world that has been going on without us for much longer than we have been here to notice, and will go on long after, exactly as extraordinary as it has always been. Good night. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested prehistoric topic you'd like to drift into next, feel free to leave it in the comments below.